So this is the Google Pixel 4a, and I've had it now for a year and a half, so I think it's time for me to finally do the long-term review of the Google Pixel 4a. I got this phone at the end of 2020, and by end, I mean literally the end, on the 31st of December 2020. This phone has been my daily driver every day for the past year. I haven't used any other phones as a main phone, and it's still holding up pretty well. So now I've had this phone for ages. Let's get into my experience with this phone after a year. Let's begin with the build quality. The phone's made of a nice smooth matte plastic. However, I have had to put this $10 case on it because before I got this case I had a problem with the phone slipping out of my hand due to the smoothness and matte finish of the phone, which feels amazing, but is ridiculously slippery. But this case fixed it really well, and I feel a lot safer using the phone because it has a little bit of protection rather than the bare foam. I really like this case because it has the whole top, bottom and buttons uncovered. I'm a big fan of this as it means plugging in a charger and headphones without squashing it in or having strange flaps. This phone is plastic though, so I still felt quite safe using this phone without a case because it's a nice cheapish plastic, which isn't the most premium material, but it means that this phone is pretty strong from drops. But for those of you out there who has a habit of sitting on their phones or something like that, this phone and other plastic phones probably isn't great for you because plastic bends quite easily compared to the glass, which shatters more easily, but it's more robust for bending. Just a quick tip for those of you who are choosing a phone. The power button and volume buttons have a nice clicking mechanism. However, it can get a bit frustrating sometimes when I'm trying to be really quiet, but the clicking is really loud. But even with that, I still absolutely love these clicky buttons. It makes it feel like I'm actually pressing a button rather than some phones or cases that I felt, which just feels like you're just squishing bumps. The power button is a distinct pixel power button, which is a faded light green power button, which I actually really like. The buttons are both on the right hand side of the phone, with the power button being above the volume button, which is different from a lot of other phones, but you quickly get used to it. Apart from the slipperiness problem, the build and finish of this phone is pretty nice. It's 143 grams, which is pretty light, and I can hold it for long periods of time without my hands hurting. The phone is around 5.8 inches and 0.3 inches thick. Over the past year, I've really come to appreciate the smallish form factor of this phone, because I can use it comfortably one-handed, and I want a phone that can actually fit in my hand. The phone released with one color and one color only, which is what Google calls just black, which is the one I have. They later released a color called barely blue. Going on that, this phone comes in one spec and one size, just like the color. It's a 5.8 inch display, Snapdragon 730G, 6GB of RAM and 128GB of storage. This phone has a headphone jack. Especially in 2022, this is pretty incredible. Pretty much all phones nowadays don't have a headphone jack, but I love how Google has put a headphone jack on a budget phone, which makes sense as a lot of people buying this phone are probably budget conscious and don't have the budget for wireless earbuds. But Google has recently released the Google Pixel Buds A series, which is a budget version of their wireless earbuds for $99, which I have gone ahead and bought. So I'm not so worried about having a headphone jack as I was when I bought this phone. Display-wise, it has a nice 5.8 inch 1080p display with a pixel density of 443 pixels per inch, which means that for every inch there are 443 pixels, or for every centimeter there are 174 pixels. The display is definitely dense enough to not be able to notice the individual pixels, and honestly the 60Hz isn't that bad. Obviously it's good to have that 90 or 120Hz screen, but unless you're coming from a higher Hz screen, you don't really notice it. 60Hz is also good because it means that it saves more battery, resulting in better battery life. I've never had a phone higher than 60Hz, so until I get one and get used to it, this feels really smooth for me. It's really good quality for simple content consumption, and it's a nice and vibrant display. The downside I've had is that it sometimes isn't bright enough for outdoor use, and I need to turn up the brightness all the way and shield it from the sun. Except that great screen. The display does rainbow a bit when looked at from a tilt, but it only happens when there's white on the screen, and if you're using the phone, you should be looking at the front of the phone, so it shouldn't really be a problem. I just thought that I'd mention it. The screen is OLED, which means that it has nice looking crushed blacks on the display and just looks higher quality in general. I'm really happy that Google decided to put an OLED screen in a phone of this price. However, one downside of OLED is something called burn-in. Burn-in typically happens on OLED displays, where if you keep putting the frame on the display, it can get burnt into the screen, meaning that you can see a faint overlay of that frame that you always use every time you use the phone. There was a time during lockdown where I turned on the always on display as it was convenient and I really liked it, but the burn-in problem really scared me to always keep it on. For those of you out there who have an OLED display on their phone, let me know if you have ever experienced burn-in down in the comments below. Also, if you are enjoying this video, be sure to subscribe to see more videos like this one and support me. Thanks so much. The cameras of this phone is probably one of or the best parts of this phone. All Google Pixel phones are known for their outstanding photos, even most of them use old camera hardware since the Pixel 2 because of Google's AI and computational photography. It creates stunning, vibrant photos with a coolish tone which comes across well. Let's go a bit further in depth. This phone has a 12 megapixel f1.7 wide camera. That's the only camera that this Pixel has on the rear. It doesn't come with a telephoto zoom camera or ultra-wide camera, but that's okay for the price. The images that come out of the rear camera are amazing. They have plenty of sharpness and vibrant colors in them, with Google HDR+, which gives the photos a classic pixel look, which is usually great. However, sometimes the phone can go a bit overboard with their HDR, sometimes looking completely unnatural or looking over-processed, but this doesn't happen too often, and the photos usually look really good. The night mode on this phone is decent, but it's not the best on the market. Portrait mode usually hits pretty well, but it's usually a hit or a miss a lot of the time. There's a setting in the Camera Photos app where you can blur the background and add what they call portrait light. Blur background is as simple as it sounds. You can blur most pictures from any camera and time, even working on a 10-year-old photo. And portrait light is where in photos you can add an artificial sun. It's a pretty cool feature, but to be honest, I've only used it a few times. A feature I really appreciate about the cameras is the exposure and shadow controls in the camera app. It lets you adjust the exposure and shadows for each individual picture as you shoot them. This is really helpful sometimes, as sometimes the phone just doesn't understand lighting conditions, and adjusting lighting manually is really helpful. Now, related to the camera, sometimes when you take a photo, it usually takes a while to process, sometimes taking up to 3 seconds before your photo is ready to be seen. There's this bug where if you take a photo on a social media app using their camera features, the photo turns out way different than what the viewfinder sees. This is pretty annoying for a lot of situations where I just want to quickly send a photo to someone, and the photo just looks really bad compared to what the viewfinder was showing. I have to use the native Pixel camera app to fix this bug and for the images to look normal. It's just a real pain, and I'm hoping that they fix it. Video wise, the back camera can shoot up to 4K at 30 frames per second, 1080 up to 120 frames per second, and 720p all the way up to 240 frames per second. To be really honest, the video on this phone is pretty bad, with the video looking too smooth, with no sharpness, and just generally bad quality for a 4K clip. Not sure what it is about the video on this phone, but the videos that come out of this phone just look really bad. With a lot of editing, you can make it look a bit better, but don't get this phone for the video camera. Also, if you are filming a lot and taking a lot of photos, the phone tends to heat up really quickly. Now, I've never had a temperature warning because I've made sure that I don't push the phone that far, but the phone definitely heats up pretty hot whenever I push it by filming, taking photos, or doing intensive tasks. So generally, this phone has a great photo camera, but a bad video camera. Let's talk battery. This phone has a 3140 mAh battery, and to simply put it, this phone has really good battery life. I can usually make a whole day without charging the phone throughout the day and just charging it every night. I'm a slightly heavy user, usually having an average of 5 hours on my phone every day. I use it for casual things like Twitter, Instagram, messages, camera, and a bit of YouTube, and that's about it. I have an iPad for YouTube and entertainment, and I have a laptop for typing, editing, and laptop things. So the only thing I'm using my phone for is just messaging and social media, with a little bit of camera use sprinkled in there. I think one of the reasons this phone has really good battery life is because it has a 1080p 60Hz screen, which is a great screen, but the 60Hz means that the phone isn't draining the battery too much. A reason this phone might be worse than other phones with this battery life is because of the size. It's nice and compact, which I absolutely love, but it means that they can't fit that big of a battery in there. This phone can usually last a whole day, but I have noticed that slowly my battery is slightly degrading. I used to get around 5 to 6 hours on my phone per day, but it seems to get around 4 to 5 hours of battery life every day now. This is expected as I've used this phone for 1.5 years now, charging it pretty much every night, so this is totally normal. When I bought this phone, I generally thought that the battery would degrade horribly after a year, seeing I charge it every day, but I'm impressed at how well this battery has held up for the last year. Unfortunately, I can't tell you the specific battery health because unlike iPhones, Pixels don't show the specific battery health, but in terms of battery, this phone is great and won't disappoint. Performance. This phone has a Snapdragon 730G chip with 6GB of LPDDR4X RAM, which is decent. It definitely isn't the fastest phone out there, but it isn't the slowest either. Navigation around the system is snappy and pretty fast. I don't think I've ever had a problem with the performance on this phone. However, there are a few times that the phone hiccups for a few seconds once I've recorded a 4K video or something, but in general it's plenty fast enough for me. I don't really play games on this phone, so unfortunately I can't really tell you about that. Sorry. This phone has a fingerprint scanner on the back and I absolutely love it. It's such good placement and my finger naturally rests there, so when I'm pulling the phone out of my pocket, my fingers already touch the fingerprint sensor, so by the time I go to actually use it, it's already unlocked. I just love how handy this is. Sound wise, this phone has stereo speakers, which is great for watching YouTube and videos. Doing a quick sound test, this is what the Pixel 4a sounds like. And this is what the iPad Air 4 sounds like. The sound from this phone sounds pretty full, with a little lacking in bass, but overall I really like the sound profile of the Google Pixel 4a. Software wise, this phone has 3 years of software updates, meaning that this phone will update all the way to Android 13, which I think is pretty good for a phone this caliber. I'm currently on Android 12 on this phone, which I'm really liking. I have had some issues though, so to see my whole experience with Android 12, make sure to watch the video I did about Android 12, which will be linked under the like button, which you should press if you've made it this far. Because this is a Google Pixel, it has some pretty cool features. First is the live caption. It can transcribe any audio that comes out of the phone, including phone calls and apps. Now playing is another feature where the phone can detect any songs or music playing in the background, which is kind of cool because if I hear a song I really like, it can automatically detect it and save it, and then I can go through the now playing history later in the day and add that song to my playlist. There's a feature called call screening where you can screen all incoming calls and hold for me, which can manage your calls for you while you're on hold on a call and alert you when you've been taken off hold. But unfortunately this isn't available in my location, but I really like the sound of those features, especially call screening. A big bug I had with this phone was that for a few months my phone's volume up button broke and it would just keep turning the volume up all the time. This was really annoying because if I was listening or watching something, it would just turn it up to max volume, but for some reason it didn't turn up the volume on any Bluetooth speaker. This also meant that when I restarted or turned on this phone after shutting it down, it would turn on in a weird Android menu because it thought I was holding the volume up button, and it would just get stuck on this menu which said no command. And to fix it, I finally figured out that I had to hold down the volume down button to counteract the volume up button being pressed, and that seemed to fix it. It was a really annoying bug, but it just seemed to magically fix itself after a few months. Now, should you get this phone? If you want a really good price phone and you're fine with the phone going out of date in a year, I'd say go with it. For around $200 on eBay, it's definitely worth it. Just keep in mind it's not the fastest thing in the world and it'll go out of date sometime next year once Android 14 comes out. But if you're fine with that, buy this phone. I absolutely love this phone and I've used it for the past year and a half and I haven't had too many problems with it, apart from that volume button bug I talked about. This phone has been an absolute pleasure to use, being my daily driver for the whole time I've had it. I've never had issues with not having enough performance or not having enough battery, and I've just loved it. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching. If you like this video and you're still here, be sure to like this video. Let me know in the comments what you think of this phone and what phone you're currently using. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified when I upload again, and I'll see you in the next one.